Belgium is a small, orderly country, quiet neighborhoods, safe streets, a place where parents once believed their children could ride bikes alone without fear, until the day they learned a monster had been hiding in plain sight. His name was Marc Dutroux, and when the truth finally came out, it didn't just expose one man's crimes, it exposed a justice system that failed repeatedly, and left a nation asking a question that still lingers today. Was Marc Dutroux acting alone, or was he protected?
Marc Dutroux was born in 1956 in Belgium. By all outward appearances, he was unremarkable, socially awkward, financially unstable, drifting between jobs and relationships. But behind that facade was a pattern that authorities had already seen. By the late 1980s, Dutroux had been convicted of abducting and abusing minors. He was sentenced to prison, a sentence meant to protect the public. Instead, in a decision that would later haunt Belgium, he was released early. No close monitoring, no serious supervision, no safeguards. Dutroux returned to society and began preparing for his worst crimes.
Between 1995 and 1996, several young girls disappeared across Belgium. They were ordinary children, students, daughters, sisters, taken during everyday moments. Their names deserve to be spoken. Julie Lejeune, 8. Julie was known as a bright, joyful child. She loved school and spending time with friends. She vanished while playing outside. Melissa Russo, 8. Melissa was energetic and affectionate, deeply loved by her family. She disappeared shortly after Julie. Both girls were abducted by Marc Dutroux. Sadly, they did not survive. Their deaths later became symbols of institutional failure, not only because of the crime itself, but because authorities missed multiple chances to intervene while they were still alive. Anne Marshall, 17. Anne was a teenager with dreams of independence and adulthood. She disappeared while riding her bicycle. Aoife Lambrechts, year 19. Aoife was the oldest victim, a young woman described as kind and thoughtful, preparing for her future. They were also abducted by Dutroux. They did not survive.
Two girls did survive, and their survival changed everything. Sabine Dardenne, 12. Sabine was abducted while riding her bicycle. She survived months of captivity. Her testimony later became critical in exposing Dutroux, not just his crimes, but the failures that allowed them to continue. She would later write about her experience, choosing to speak so that others would not be forgotten. Laetitia Delhez, 14. Laetitia was abducted shortly after Sabine. She also survived. It was Laetitia's escape, when Dutroux briefly left her unguarded, that finally led police to uncover the truth. Without her courage, the full extent of the crimes may never have been known. At Dutroux's property in Marcinelle, investigators discovered hidden rooms, small, concealed spaces designed to imprison his victims. What makes this discovery especially chilling is not just what was found, but how many times police came close before missing it. In one instance, officers searched Dutroux's home and left. Victims were still inside, alive. This single failure would become one of the most infamous moments in European criminal justice history.
Marc Dutroux did not act entirely alone. His wife at the time, Michelle Martin, was aware that girls were being held captive. She failed to help them. She left them locked away. She was convicted for her role and later sentenced, though her eventual parole sparked public outrage. Another name looms over the case, Michel Nihoul. Nihoul was a wealthy businessman and associate of Dutroux, accused by witnesses of involvement in trafficking circles and elite parties. However, due to insufficient evidence, he was acquitted. To this day, many believe questions about his role were never fully answered. As the case unfolded, Belgium learned something almost as disturbing as the crimes themselves. The system failed, repeatedly. Police ignored tips. Agencies fought over jurisdiction. Evidence was mishandled. Investigators who pushed too hard were removed. One judge was famously dismissed after alleging interference from higher authorities. Public trust collapsed.
In response, Over 300,000 people marched silently through Brussels in what became known as the White March. Parents, children, entire families demanding accountability. Out of this outrage grew conspiracy theories that persist today. Claims of child trafficking networks, powerful clients, evidence suppressed to protect elites. No definitive proof has ever confirmed a large-scale conspiracy, but the unanswered questions remain. And for many, incompetence alone does not explain the scale of failure. In 2004, Marc Dutroux was sentenced to life imprisonment. He showed no remorse, offered no meaningful explanations, named no additional accomplices. Michel Martin served time and was later released on parole, reigniting national anger. Belgium rewrote laws, changed parole systems, reformed police coordination, but reforms came after the damage was done.
Marc Dutroux is often called the Beast of Belgium. But the true horror of this case isn't just one man, it's how many warnings were ignored, how many chances were missed, how many children paid the price for institutional failure. Some survived, some did not. And Belgium still lives with the question, was this the work of one monster, or the result of a system that looked away for too long? Because when justice fails, evil doesn't need help hiding.
Marc Dutroux was convicted, sentenced to life. The case officially was closed, but for many in Belgium, that's exactly when the unease began. Because the deeper investigators, journalists, and citizens looked, the clearer it became that this story didn't feel finished. Not because of rumors alone, but because of missing evidence, silenced witnesses, and decisions that defied logic. This is not a story about what can be proven. This is a story about what was never explained.
From the very beginning, investigators struggled with a basic reality. Marc Dutroux did not have the money, mobility, or connections one would expect for the scale of his crimes. He was frequently unemployed, he lived beyond his means, he owned multiple properties. So, where did the money come from? Authorities officially concluded it came from burglaries, stolen cars, and petty crime. But witnesses, including some later dismissed, described something else entirely: transportation of victims, meetings with unknown adults, references to clients, locations outside Dutroux's known properties. None of this was ever conclusively proven in court, but it seeded doubt.
One name refuses to disappear from the Dutroux conspiracies: Michel Nihoul. Nihoul was a businessman with political and social connections. He organized parties attended by influential figures. He knew Dutroux personally. Multiple witnesses accused Nihoul of involvement in trafficking and exploitation networks, and yet, he was acquitted. The court ruled that testimony against him was unreliable, contradictory, or unsupported by physical evidence. For skeptics, this raised a disturbing question. Was there no evidence, or was evidence never fully pursued?
Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the conspiracy narrative isn't who was investigated, but who was removed. Judge Jean-Marc Connerat, a widely respected investigator, aggressively pursued leads involving potential networks and institutional failures. He gained public trust. Then, he was removed from the case, officially for a procedural violation, attending a charity dinner for victims' families. To the public, this felt symbolic. The one investigator pushing hardest was suddenly gone. After his removal, several lines of inquiry quietly disappeared.
Several witnesses initially described organized abuse involving multiple perpetrators. Some later recanted, some were discredited, some changed their stories entirely. Authorities stated this proved the claims were false. But critics argue something else: that vulnerable witnesses, many with troubled backgrounds, were easy to dismiss once their testimony became inconvenient. In conspiracy circles, this raises a chilling thought. If victims of organized abuse are inconsistent, does that mean they're lying? Or traumatized? One of the most persistent theories is that powerful individuals were shielded to prevent national scandal. This theory is fueled not by proof, but by patterns. High-ranking officials rotated off the case, evidence mishandling with no accountability, repeated administrative errors, minimal consequences for catastrophic failures. Belgium's justice system eventually admitted systemic incompetence. But for many citizens, incompetence doesn't explain everything.
When over 300,000 people marched silently through Brussels, it wasn't just about Dutroux, it was about trust. Parents believed the system valued procedure over protection, that children were failed to avoid embarrassment, that truth was secondary to stability. The White March wasn't political. It was existential. A country asking who was watching the watchers. Let's be clear, there is no verified evidence that Marc Dutroux was part of a proven, elite, organized trafficking ring. No convictions, no confirmed client list, no documented payments. But there is verified evidence of multiple institutional failures, ignored warnings, premature releases, mishandled searches, silenced investigative momentum, and sometimes absence of proof doesn't erase doubt, it feeds it.
Most true crime cases end when the sentence is handed down. This one didn't, because Belgium didn't just lose children, it lost faith. Faith that justice is impartial, faith that power doesn't protect itself, faith that monsters don't need permission to operate. Marc Dutroux is locked away. But the system that failed to stop him had no bars. And the most dangerous part of this story isn't what we know, it's what we'll never be able to prove. Because sometimes the truth isn't hidden by darkness. Sometimes it's buried under silence.
By the time Marc Dutroux stood trial, Belgium wasn't just traumatized, it was saturated. Saturated with headlines, speculation, leaked details, and fear. And when fear meets non-stop media coverage, something dangerous happens. The story starts to change, not because facts disappear, but because human memory bends under pressure. This is the part of the Dutroux case few people talk about. Not the crimes, but how truth itself began to fracture. In the mid-1990s, Belgium experienced something new. 24-hour news coverage fueled by outrage. Every development became breaking news. Every rumor became a headline. Every anonymous source became a talking point. Children were missing. The system had failed, and the public wanted answers immediately. The media wasn't just reporting the case, it was shaping it in real time.
As journalists competed for exclusives, information began leaking from inside the investigation. Details that should have remained confidential were discussed openly. This had consequences. Witnesses were exposed to news footage, theories, other testimonies. Speculation framed as fact. Psychologists call this memory contamination. When people repeatedly hear a version of events, especially during trauma, the brain can begin to merge outside information with lived experience, not lying, not inventing, but rewriting memory without realizing it. Several witnesses in the Dutroux case were deeply vulnerable. Some were minors. Some had experienced abuse. Some came from unstable backgrounds. They were asked to recall events under intense public scrutiny, hostile cross-examination, and constant media exposure. Small inconsistencies were treated as proof of deception. But trauma doesn't produce clean timelines. It produces fragmented memory, delayed recall, contradictions that feel real to the person experiencing them. This became a critical failure point.
As testimonies shifted, defense attorneys and commentators began framing witnesses as unreliable. The narrative quietly changed from something larger may be happening to these people can't be trusted, and once doubt takes hold, everything collapses. Legitimate questions became conspiracy. Institutional failure became panic. Public concern became hysteria. Not because answers were found, but because uncertainty became inconvenient. Authorities attempted to regain control of the narrative. They emphasized the lone offender theory, procedural explanations, administrative mistakes. This wasn't necessarily deception, but it was containment, because admitting uncertainty would have meant admitting the system might still be vulnerable. And systems rarely do that willingly.
The Belgian public didn't reject the official conclusions out of obsession. They rejected them because the story felt unfinished. Too many errors, too many contradictions, too many moments where the truth almost surfaced, then vanished. When institutions lose credibility, people don't stop asking questions. They ask harder ones. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Multiple things can be true at once. Marc Dutroux may not have been part of a proven elite network. Witnesses may have been genuinely traumatized. Media coverage may have distorted testimony. Authorities may have acted defensively rather than transparently. And still, something went terribly wrong. Not in one moment, but slowly, systemically, publicly. Most cases give us closure. This one gave Belgium reforms, but not peace. Because when media noise, institutional failure, and human trauma collide, truth doesn't disappear. It becomes impossible to isolate. Marc Dutroux is easy to name. Evil often is. What's harder to name are the forces that let evil hide behind confusion, procedure, and plausible deniability. This case didn't just expose a criminal. It exposed how fragile truth becomes when fear speaks louder than facts and silence feels safer than answers. And maybe that's why, decades later, Belgium still whispers the same question. What if the truth wasn't lost, but slowly buried by everyone who couldn't afford to find it?